Good evening and welcome once again to Plain Talk, current affairs program discussing topical issues with very special guests. This evening's program is moving away from the death penalty, and my guests are a very special group. They've been here, brought by the European Commission to participate in a judicial commission on the death penalty. I shall immediately introduce them. On my extreme left is Professor Marc Bossuyt. Professor Bossuyt is a former judge and president of the Belgian Constitutional Court. He's been a visiting professor at a number of universities, and in his career he has served in many capacities in human rights, including chairperson of the United Nations Subcommission on the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights. To his right is Dr. Yvonne Simonovic, lawyer, academic, politician and diplomat in the Croatian Foreign Ministry, where he has held positions including ambassador to the United Nations and presided over the United Nations Economic and Social Council. And last, but most importantly, Commissioner Navi Pillay, who since April 2015 has been a commissioner with the International Commission Against the Death Penalty. Prior to that appointment, she has served as a lawyer in South Africa, where she was the first woman to start a law practice in her home province of Natal, and where she acted as a defense attorney for anti-apartheid activists, exposing torture and helping establish key rights for prisoners, including the famous Nelson Mandela on Robben Island. That's a long introduction, but I couldn't do any less than that. Welcome to my program. Welcome to Guyana, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I know my understanding is you're guests of the European Union, and it's not the first occasion on which I've had the privilege to host a program like this by persons involving the European Union offices. Why is it the European Union appear to treat the death penalty almost as an article of faith? Anybody can start.
Well, maybe because I come from a country with Mr. Simonovic also, who is a member of the European Union. I think the European Union has a Charter on Fundamental Rights, and one of the basic provisions is that there should be no death penalty in the European Union, because it is taking away the right to life, and the right to life is the most fundamental of all rights, because when you don't live anymore, all other rights are gone. So I think it's quite logical that it is a cornerstone of the human rights policy of the European Union.
If I may add to that,
Sure, sir.
it's not only European Union. In the whole Europe, we have just one state that is retention state that has kept the death penalty, and it's Belarus. And in fact, whole Human Rights Council of Europe is the organization for which precondition is to accept that you will not have death penalty. So you cannot not only be European Union, you cannot be Council of Europe, which is much broader and includes all countries of Europe except Belarus.
I'd like to add, though, that this is a pretty recent development in the European Union. So I don't want the impression out there that they've had this value for a very long time. It's a recent development because of human rights activity pointing out the evils of the death penalty. So I just want to put that out across there because I come from Africa, and I'm really watchful for who got the values first and so on.
It's global work in progress.
Yes.
Incidentally, I noticed that Turkey has announced that it might reintroduce the death penalty following the recent.
Which would mean that they would have to leave Council
I
of
thought as much, yes.
Council of Europe.
Now, I'd like to spend some time on this debate, because it is a debate that's still going on, and as we know, although we talk about over 100 countries have abolished the death penalty, some of the major countries of the world, United States of America, China, India, they still have the death penalty. Professor Bossuyt pointed out as perhaps the most fundamental right. But there are different sides to this argument. If we were to spend some time on the justification for the abolition of the death penalty, could we identify some of those? Could we spend some time doing that?
Well, there are many arguments, but it's discriminatory because it's only vulnerable people that are victims of the death penalty. It is you have the risk of an error, and you can is no remedial to that. It also not proven at all that it is a deterrent, because what people are really are afraid of is to be caught. The penalty that will be imposed, whether it's lifelong imprisonment or death penalty, doesn't make much difference for them in deciding whether they will act criminally or not. But I think the major reason why we oppose the death penalty is because this is contrary to human dignity. If you associate yourself in any way with the death penalty, you are putting yourself more or less on the same level of the criminal himself. Someone has killed someone, and because he has killed someone, we will kill you. So you're doing exactly the same thing, and you're taking away this most fundamental right for a human being, and it's contrary to human being to be associated with that. I think that's, for me, the fundamental argument.
And we can twist a little bit your question and say, what do we get by having death penalty? There is no conclusive evidence that death penalty deters crime.
But would it be true to say that neither one way or the other?
There is no conclusive evidence,
yes,
meaning that there were some research studies that were partially covering some countries for some period of time that were indicating that there may be some deterring effects, and there were some studies indicating that in fact death penalty may be inciting violence. So we can safely say, after so much academic research, that there is no conclusive evidence that death penalty deters crime. But secondly, the issue that is being raised, that the revenge that families of victims get out of death penalty is helping their psychological healing, which is not true simply. The psychological researchers have found out, first of all, that there is quite a number of family members that do not want the death penalty because they think it's continuation of violence.
But there are others who do.
Well, some do. But what happens to the one who do? First of all, just in very small percentage of cases of intentional homicides, in most systems, it's very few who end up being executed. So what are with other family members? What does that mean? That my father was less valuable because his killer was not executed. So they remain frustrated. Also, there are some countries where, because of guarantees, because of remedies, if you want to be sure that you will not execute an innocent man, legal proceedings are lasting very long. And in the United States at the moment, you are sitting 16 years on average at the death row in order to finally be executed. And it's just few of them that are being executed. So for all these 16 years, families do not have a psychological feeling of closure. It's a permanent, in fact, torture to them. So one person, it's a Catholic nun, who was spending a lot of time with death penalty convicted persons on a death row. She said, death penalty is for victims like passing to a thirsty man a glass of salty water.
Oh, well, I'm here representing the International Coalition Against the Death Penalty. And previously, as you introduced me, I was the High Commissioner, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. So both these bodies have compiled studies. For instance, why have retentionist states moved away from the death penalty? And they've looked at the various reasons why states have done that. And we have to readily acknowledge that wherever states have moved away from the death penalty, there was emotional reactions by the population in favor of the death penalty. So not only here in Guyana, where I'm told the people like to retain the death penalty, that is the case in many societies. That's one. Yet governments took the lead to move away from the death penalty, and that's because it's the ultimate violation of human rights. Where they did it, and Rwanda as an example, after the genocide, you would think, having lost 800,000 Tutsis in a genocide, that they would go on a trip of vengeance. We have to hit back, we have to do to them what they did to us. Similarly in South Africa. At the time the Constitutional Court looked at the issue, there were 400 people in death row in South Africa. And I can tell you all of them are people of color. That's another observation I should make, that wherever in the world death penalty is applied, it's mainly against people of color. And that reminds me, where did this originate from? It originated from colonial systems in places that were colonized. So South Africa, we had these laws under colonialism and apartheid. We had a chance to move from a rule by government to rule by rule of law and a good constitution. That's why we moved away from the death penalty there.
Is it entirely correct to say that the death penalty was introduced by maybe the colonizers? Because lots of those communities and countries had the death penalties centuries ago.
Oh yes, no, I was talking about two countries, yeah, and South Africa in particular, and Guyana, since I'm here. So we both now have good constitutions, very similar. Protection of fundamental rights in the Guyana Constitution, right to life, for instance, is there. But both constitutions are silent on the death penalty.
Well, our constitution actually allows for capital punishment. It does, and it's a question I do have to ask. What's your view on those countries whose constitutions, ostensibly the expressions of the will of the people, provide for the death penalty? Should the will of the people be suddenly set aside because someone thinks that, look, we've moved to a different level of civilization?
No, I think that is the major argument. I think we are in a modern society. We are in a civilized world. We try to be, and it's difficult to argue that it's compatible with modern civilization to keep the death penalty, because we believe in a society which is based on human rights, and this is a violation of one of the most fundamental human rights. So we do know that in public opinion, there are, in many countries, there is a division. There are people in favor, there are people against. But that's why you need leadership in this field. You need that the responsible people getting aware that the arguments in favor are not justified, and that one should educate the population into that direction. And by abolishing, it is a method of making your society more respectful of human rights.
And there is a huge impact of information objective, impartial information on the attitude towards death penalty, the more population is educated about death penalty, the less they are in favor of death penalty. And it was happening in all countries, that there is a high correlation between more knowledge about death penalty and less appetite for the death penalty. So when you say if it's in constitution, what to do what we are doing now. Let us discuss. Let us raise arguments. What are the costs and what are the benefits of the death penalty? Let us not be emotional about the issue. Some horrible crimes are being committed, and the perpetrators do deserve harshest punishment. But that doesn't have to transform us into murderers killing the perpetrator.
And you are right, of course. There are laws and constitutions that are either silent on the death penalty and do not abolish it. Laws that provide for the death penalty. In South Africa, we had laws that provided death penalty even against political activists. Nelson Mandela and his colleagues who were charged for treason would have been sentenced to death. That's the sentence in the apartheid days. And we know now that the judge was going to pass the death penalty. He had kind of written half his draft and so on, when there was worldwide pressure not to do so. Now, can you imagine if a man like that had been hanged or executed in other ways? We would have lost a great leader. But that's how close he came to be hanged. Then there are societies, you're quite right, they don't have legal systems. It didn't arise from colonial days. They claim it's their traditional system, that it's their culture. They quote the Bible, they quote whatever religious texts, and they say the people expect it. There are countries that execute a large number of people, and that's their basis, that we always had it. We don't see why we should change it now. Those are the reasons out there. So I agree with my colleagues. Things have really evolved now. I asked the judges today, there are some sentences in other countries, and what is your view on those sentences, such as amputation of limbs, such as the burying people alive and stoning them to death? Would you, or public flogging, public executions, where the public is invited to look at that? How would people here in this country feel about those kind of sentences? So this is what we mean by a value system, evolving values. If you find that abhorrent, then one should find the death sentence abhorrent, because it amounts to torture, cruel and inhuman punishment.
But you abolish the death penalty, and you probably replace it with mandatory lifetime imprisonment. Is not equally cruel and inhuman and degrading?
Well,
What's the evidence?
If you are looking at me,
any person.
I certainly do not support life without parole. I believe that if people are mentally healthy, and if we give them a second chance, that after that second chance they can be resocialized. So I know that some of my colleagues think the death penalty could be replaced by life sentence without parole, but I personally do not think so.
I may add to that quite recently the European Court of Human Rights in 2013 decided that the life sentence without any possibility of parole is also a violation of the European Convention on Human Rights. What the court requires is that at least after some time, and that time can be quite long when it is a life sentence, they speak about 25 years, there should be a review of the situation and the personality of the convicted person to find out whether there are still justifications at that time to keep that person further in prison. So that is the view of the European Court on Human Rights. So I do believe that it should be replaced in principle by life sentence, but not by life sentence without any possibility of parole.
But even a life without parole is better, in my view, than death sentence, because, what does life without parole mean? Government can change, legislative body can change, constitution can change, and they may be parole, although today you think it's life without parole.
Yeah.
While we say that even a convict is entitled to human rights, we do not say that people shouldn't be punished for committing very serious crimes. We encourage people, even judges, to look at alternate forms of imprisonment and of penalties. In Rwanda, inside there, they had 150,000 suspects, and they held the Gacaca court, a traditional system.
Did I hear right? 150,000?
After the genocide. We in the International Tribunal had 8, and the Security Council statute said the maximum penalty is life imprisonment. You're quite right. Life imprisonment without parole is a matter of concern, but that is what I myself passed there, is just imprisonment for the remainder of your life. But here I think where the process has gone is, let's look at alternate forms of punishment, and the people of Rwanda came up with sentences that suited them, such as asking the convicted person to build the house of the victim. So it's what the people determine. And that's why we're encouraging a dialogue here, that people think in terms of alternate forms of punishment that are not cruel and inhumane, but nevertheless satisfy the aspect of retribution for serious crimes.
You make a although it's probably debatable whether a value system, any suggestion that countries that have abolished the death penalty are any more civilized than those who haven't, because that raises some serious questions about places like even America, India, China, as we said, and on the other side of the divide, lots of countries in Africa and Asia do have the death penalty. Does that make them any less civilized? But so I'm suggesting that there's still some debate on this issue. But what are some of the economic arguments one can advance? Because we often hear this. Look, why should a taxpayer, and probably a relative of a victim who has been killed at the hands of some criminal, turn around and pay through their taxes for the maintenance of that person in prison?
Well, I think the easy argument is that it's difficult to accept that one would say in order to save some money, we will kill people. And that is how we show how important life is for us. Life is so important for us that in order not to have to pay for the food for a prisoner, we will kill him. This is not what I would call progress of civilization.
If I may offer you 2 different answers to this question.
Sure.
One is, I was traveling with Secretary General of the United Nations to a state that I will not name, and we were talking to President of that state. And Secretary General was urging the President to stop executing. So the President looked at Secretary General and said, I don't have money to feed them. I do not have money to build them jails. Bullet is cheaper, but if you want, you can take them with you to New York. So this is one example. This is logic that we were saying that the bullet is cheaper. But there is another logic. In the United States, the price of one execution, when compared to life without parole, is that the death sentence is 2 to 3 times more expensive than life without parole.
Is that because of the
Because of
appeal
legal
process?
because of length of the appeal process, because of...
Well, you're not arguing for shortening the appeal process or depriving.
I am not. I'm arguing to abolish death penalty and avoid long appeal process, which is the only guarantee that you will not be executing innocent people.
Commissioner?
Well, that's a risky road to take. Are you against all forms of imprisonment? This is why I urge a discussion to see what forms of penalties the public is willing to accept. Imprisonment has always been there, and periodically there's been many steps to humanize it, humanize the system more. We heard, for instance, from the resident coordinator of UNDP here that she visited Rwanda and saw that the prisoners there in Rwanda actually were able to move around outside. They were not enclosed in the building. So the public in countries can discuss these issues to see how best they want to address this. But you cannot do without imprisonment at all. Why? Because we believe in the principle that the victims need justice. And the way to do it is courts convicting, police investigating crimes, and courts convicting them after a fair trial.
If we take the premise to its conclusion, all killing is bad, are we then saying any state killing in any circumstances is bad and wrong?
No, not necessarily, because you have, for instance, self-defense. So if a country is attacked, you may defend yourself. But then there's an immediate reaction, and it is necessary in order to stop what has to be stopped. Here, about the death penalty, it's not someone who is attacked and who defends himself and kills the one that is attacking him. No, it is cold-blooded, deliberated, well-meditated killing of a person, and that is unacceptable.
What I would add to it, though, is that for me, the state that kills is a dangerous state. Because if we would compare who are the states that kill, they are much more prone to be engaged in other forms of human rights violations, such as, for example, torture when state interests are at stake, or to launch wars that are not necessarily wars of self-defense. So I would say that there is a correlation between state that kills and the state that commits some other human rights violations.
You're suggesting that defines the kind of society?
To a certain extent, it defines the relationship between state and the individual. And I don't think that in the 21st century we as individuals, as member of the society, want to give a state a license to kill.
And of course a different area is that states have armies, so you have the international rules of war. And why do we have such strict rules and the Geneva Conventions, for instance, against indiscriminate killing? Because that is a very troublesome area where there is a right to kill in conflict and war situations. So that's why it's so very carefully regulated under these international conventions. If under those laws of war the killing was unlawful, or could have been avoided, or caused deaths because of it was not proportionate to the risk involved, this is all safeguards in international law, then soldiers could be prosecuted as well, and they are. So there is a right to kill, I agree with you, in military law. War, I wish that we didn't have them, but we do. But at least there are guarantees fixed in there, and it's not, as Marc says, intentional killing and taking the life of a fellow human being.
This move away from the death penalty began some years ago. Over the past several years, we have found that there are some really, really bad people out there. People who would indiscriminately kill scores. We've seen it. You've seen in France twice within a space of a year. You've seen Europe under siege. How then do you make this case for the abolition of the death penalty against those persons who don't give an iota for the entire society?
But what I would answer is, I don't think it's really a good case to favor the death penalty, because those people, terrorist people that are killing others indiscriminately, they are willing to sacrifice their own life. They're blowing up themselves. They're killing themselves in order to kill people. So how can you expect that the death penalty will be a deterrent to someone who is willing to kill himself?
Well, not so much the death penalty, but the state killing them. Why not? Why should they be tolerated? They're anti-society.
Yes, but it is simply that we don't want that our society is put on the same level as they.
I would give another argument. If you execute somebody, that in certain cultures make that person a martyr. If you incarcerate him for long-term prison sentence, he is convict like anyone else. But if he is a martyr, if he is executed, that may be an incentive for the recruitment of some other extremists. So it has potentially counterproductive effects.
Now, of course, we condemn terrorism. So many countries now face this situation, and innocent lives are lost. We feel emotionally about terrorism. But the worst thing to do is to change laws and pass laws when there's a catastrophe or a violent killing. We act out of anger. So you mentioned President Erdogan in Turkey. Now that would be an example that concerns me. He did say that if Parliament accepts the death penalty, and he will accept it, and he's reacting to the coup there, and other countries react to terrorism. The UN is very, very clear about counter-terrorism measures, that you still have to respect human rights when you are dealing with terrorism. So it's not good law that is born of when, even in a national situation, we react very angrily to a particular murder. I heard of one where a man killed his wife and 3 children. Yeah, when something terrible happened, that's not the time to go and change the law. Well, things may change after that.
I'm speaking, and I think the people of Europe, I don't know if they had to, if there was a referendum, and let's not talk about Brexit, but if there was a referendum on the death penalty, because people are seeing themselves endangered. So I'm not suggesting this is an immediate reaction, but the trend seems to suggest that, look, maybe, and I hate to say this as an activist myself, concerned about human rights, that some human rights may have gone too far, that you can't maybe tap people's telephone, or you can't do this without some court order.
Well,
do we need to rethink some of these policies?
Fear and anger are bad advisors. I am chairing in New York a group on protection of human rights while countering terrorism. And if you observe comparative practice, the most efficient fight against terrorism is sticking to the rule of law, treating them as criminals what they are. In public proceedings, show what have they done and what a menace they are and how ruthless they are. If you, instead of them, keep them incommunicado, you torture them and you extrajudicially kill them, you are missing an opportunity to show what sort of people they are and what sort of state you are. You are a state that cares about rights and respects rights. So in fact, if you use violations of human rights, you are losing the battle. with terror. So respecting human rights when countering terrorism is not only right thing to do, it's most efficient thing to do. I have myself gone and I've talked to some ex-terrorists, being Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab. I have talked to civilians, and I did hear that human rights violations while countering terrorism have contributed to their radicalization and recruitment. I've heard, well, they have tortured my uncle, they have killed, and so on. So that only helps to spread extremism, just treating them based on rule of law.
Yes, so I agree with Yvonne. It's very, very important that the rule of law is observed always. No state can act above the rule of law, not even a super powerful state which has these capabilities of distant remote killing and so on. And also my second point is a state cannot adopt the methods of terrorists. You have to act within the rule of law.
We
See?
should not put ourselves on the same level.
We are better than that.
Yes.
I wonder.
Nobody will convince us to go and commit suicide, for instance, right?
He's thinking.
He's thinking about it.
What would be a compelling argument?
I want to come back to this point that Marc raised about the culture and what it says. What do you say about those cultures? And I'm not trying to put you in a hot seat, Marc, but where, for example, and maybe Commissioner, you might add to answer this question. Where, for example, there's honor killing, as we saw in Pakistan the other day, and it's very common in certain cultures and certain types of countries. How do you react to that? That's their culture. It's born of their religion.
You know, this is what I put to the judges today. There are some abhorrent practices out there. Does that offend your conscience? So people are very critical of honor killings. It's just an outrageous violation of human right that someone thinks because of tradition and their beliefs they have a right to kill people. So we condemn that. And just similarly, the death penalty being imposed hurts the conscience of many other people. And that's why I highlighted, would you approve of a sentence of cutting off limbs? It happens in other countries. Would you flog women in public? It happens in other countries. I was in the Maldives as High Commissioner for Human Rights, and a case had just happened. The woman complained she was raped by 2 or 3 men. And then they got hold of her, together with the religious leader, and flogged her in public. And I happened to go there then. It was topical, and I said, maybe you should have a dialogue about this and consider whether the woman's human rights were violated here. And to my surprise, there was a small group that reacted violently. They accused me of speaking against Islam. Really violent protests against the United Nations for that. I stand by my position that that is abhorrent. It's a serious violation of human rights. It cannot be justified at all. So that's my position on practices such as honor killing.
Your question is especially pertinent when we are dealing with Islamic countries and Sharia. And there is no doubt that Sharia provides for death penalty for certain crimes. And I have heard a very good explanation how can you go for moving away from death penalty from Islamic perspective. And my interlocutor was former president of Tunisia, who made a major move from the death penalty. And he shared with me that he spent sleepless nights how to reconcile Sharia, and he is a good Muslim. His name is Marzouki. And in the same time, necessity to move from the death penalty. So he said, on one side you have Sharia law that says that for certain crimes there should be a death penalty. But there is a provision in Quran saying that killing one innocent person is like killing all humankind. And he said, we are imperfect. We are not free from the possibility of judicial error. And as long as this is the case, we cannot execute anyone. So that was his way to resolve the dilemma.
Well, at least there are also several Islamic countries that do not apply the death penalty. So,
But the majority do.
yeah, but the minority shows that it's possible to survive as an Islamic country without doing it.
You mentioned, Yvonne, you used the word reconciliation just now. It strikes me that there are many countries that find the killing absolutely reprehensible, yet they participate with countries that send out drones to kill indiscriminately. And that includes European countries that speak glowingly and nobly of not taking lives. How do you reconcile, to use your word?
I organized in New York an event on the use of drones. And first of all, drone is not a weapon of indiscriminate attack. Drones are extremely precise. They are more precise than almost all other weapons when used in a right way. And let me now tell you what would be the right way. The problem with drones is, when are you entitled to use drones? And sometimes drones are used, in my view, in violations of international humanitarian law. So if you have two sides who are throwing bombs on each other and soldiers are killing each other, if you use drones, it wouldn't be any violations of international humanitarian law.
But if you use long distance drones now.
Yeah, but if you use it for targeted killings, well, that's something different.
But this is killing. I'm glad you used the word. It is killing. Why this state that says we should not kill, the value of human life is so sublime and supreme? Why are we doing it?
We are discussing now killing in wartime.
Depends on who defines war. I mean,
Yeah,
you
I
had
do
George
agree.
Bush and Tony Blair talking about war, and they created the myth of war.
Yeah, but the United States also has the death penalty, so for them it's no problem.
But if I
No,
may,
no, but sorry.
if
go
I
ahead.
may add, there is another issue with the use of drones. Anyone who uses drones should take appropriate legal decision about whether use of drone is lawful or unlawful. Then there is an obligation also to report publicly that drones have been used, and also to report on any sort of so-called collateral damage or killed innocent people when using drones. So those are all considered from human rights perspective obligations. First, legal use, and then transparency about the use and transparency about eventual victims inflicted.
You know, although the same rules of war apply to armed drones and remote killing, the special rapporteurs have investigated all that and made many recommendations. The United Nations, as well as the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, has demanded accountability. And you're quite right to be troubled by it, because the way it was used in Yemen, for instance, they killed remotely innocent people.
Well, despite the word, I can't recall the word you used, almost extremely accurate. I mean, we've known hospitals that might have been victims of drones.
That's not because of imprecise character of weapons. It potentially is related to unlawful use of drones.
Is there now, within international law, not standard operating procedure, that would not be the right term for something as big as drone, but do we now have international guidelines adopted by, say, the United Nations, the European Court, on the use of drones?
The European Court, as far as I know, did
It's,
not. But you're working on that in the United Nations.
It's emerging. It's emerging. Those opinions by various UN human rights bodies on the use of drones are slowly formulating a body of, I wouldn't say law yet, but a body of views on when use of drones represents violation of human rights and humanitarian law. If you ask me whether we would need something more precise, we would desperately need that. So I think it's very necessary for the sake of a safer future to have precise international legal regulation.
And it's
of
on the
use
agenda
drones.
of the Human Rights Council. Member states are considering it because we are very, very concerned about the lack of accountability, the lack of transparency. So the Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Killings has studied that, presents reports regularly and has made recommendations. And this is why I said the rules of war also apply
That's it.
to that situation. But we are very troubled that it's all being done in secret.
I think what's important to stress is the laws of war are applicable regardless what type of weapon. It's no different laws of war according to different types of weapons. It's not because a new weapon is invented that the laws of war are not applicable.
But you mentioned one important word, transparency. Secretive use of drones is never legal. You must justify use of drones, and if there are casualties, you must report on them, establish why civilian casualties have been inflicted, and punish responsible ones.
As I said before I started this, before we came on the air, I am a supporter of I'm an abolitionist when it comes to the death penalty. But I think objectively, as you look across the world, some countries, and I mean, I'm not asking you to comment specifically on Donald Trump, but he has said, and a potential president of the United States of America, suggesting that, look, we may want to move towards not only waterboarding, but he thinks that might be a mild form. Now, I'm not asking you to comment on that, but is this world in danger, from your own experiences, of falling back from that movement towards the abolition of the death penalty? Are we in danger of that?
The answer
Real danger, I mean.
The answer is yes. Long-term trends were very positive. After Second World War, we had just a couple of abolitionist countries, and as you rightly pointed out, now we have 102 abolitionist countries. Majority of countries in the world are abolitionist. If you take into account that out of 193 member states of United Nations, 169 are not executing country, either because they are abolitionist or implement moratorium, either de facto or de. However, we do have some negative trends. You are rightly pointing it out. When we compare, for example, 2015 and 2014, we had more executions in 2015 than 2014, and we had more executing states. So there are some dangerous trends, and you are quite rightly attributing these challenges to fight against terrorism, to fear about spreading of narco trafficking. So fear and lack of information and knowledge that executions do not deter crimes are mainly responsible for these negative trends.
And I want to add to say, of course, we are very afraid of a pushback on human rights gains and principles. For instance, on women's reproductive rights. For instance, on Bush's attempt to redefine torture, to go back on the absolute prohibition of torture. We have to watch out for this, and a particular risk lies in leaders making irresponsible statements. Leaders must exercise caution in stating principles and values, because their followers pick up on these. It becomes normal once a leader says it's all right. I've been around the world and people have said, who are the role models do we have? And invariably they came out with Gandhi, Martin
Mandela.
Luther King and Mandela.
Ask Guyanese, they will tell you exactly that.
Is that so? Yes.
So the leaders should not just think what is prevailing opinion. Then they are just followers. They should lead and try to influence public opinion. So if you have a problem with violent crime, try to address that by fixing your justice system and your security
Social
system.
and economic and all.
So, do not kill for votes because it's popular.
That certainly sounds like a good label. Now, they not maybe not lust, but a temptation for revenge by families, survivors of persons who have been killed. What can a state tell those people? They say, look, we are not going to pander to your quest for revenge, but how should a state respond to that kind of not only emotional need, but the economic need? In many cases, that's the breadwinner you've just taken out of the whole equation. What does the state say? And you people have clearly studied these issues.
You spoke about Trump and I spoke about Mandela. Yeah, he moved us away from the path of vengeance. Really, if it was left to me, even I might have said, no, we've got to fix them up, those who oppressed us. He moved us away from those. So therefore, leaders should take the position of obeying the rule of law, because there's certainty in the rule of law, and we should operate under the rule of law.
But my question, Commissioner, is what about the people who have, the person has died, he's gone, he or she is gone, but the survivors, dependents, including children. What obligation does the state owe to those people, particularly if it wants to say, look, try to control your anger, try to control your love, your lust for revenge?
Give them psychological support because they are deeply traumatized people. Help them with psychological counseling and provide them economic support, especially in the immediate follow-up to the tragedy that they have. A lot of them cannot concentrate anymore, cannot go to work. It's not only that they lost breadwinner, they have lost, some of them, at least temporarily, some of their work capacity. So do not try to show that you protect them by being tough on perpetrator. Do something for them.
Yeah, I fully agree.
Now, we have a few minutes left. What can a country like Guyana do? And it has, you correctly pointed out, the data out there that we have not executed anyone. How do you get countries and maybe third world or two and a second, I guess. How do you get those countries to go to that ultimate step, if that is what you think should be the goal?
I would say that now Guyana is an exception in South America. All other countries of South America did abolish the death penalty, and Guyana is the only one. So either Guyana should say, well, it's a mistake that we belong to the continent, we should become an island and drive away in the sea, or it should abolish the death penalty as just all the other countries of South America have been done. So it becomes an anomaly. So I think that is, in my view, quite a good argument in favoring the abolition also in this country.
But Mark, what do you think about the moratorium we essentially...
It's a first step. So you have now a de facto moratorium, and that's already very important. Very important. The next step should be a de jure moratorium, which can take the form of a declaration, and also what we expect is that the government should not oppose a resolution of the General Assembly which is biannual and which is in favor of steps taken towards the abolition of the death penalty. So such a vote will take place also before the end of this year. And then the last step is if I may say one word on the optional protocol, the second optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, aiming at the abolition of the death penalty. That optional protocol is now already ratified by 81 countries, many Western Europeans, many Eastern Europeans, and many from Latin America. So we hope that Guyana will also be able to do that step, to sign that second optional protocol and to become a party to that optional protocol, which as in one article, first the obligation not to execute anybody, and second for the government itself to take the necessary measures to wipe it out of the criminal code.
Really, I think it's impressive that Guyana for 20 years has adopted a position observing a moratorium. And I noticed that the current government would have been in the opposition then, and even they didn't object to the moratorium. And the people of Guyana themselves, whom I've been told again and again, you know, are thirsty for vengeance, and they bloodthirsty, they want the death penalty, so they haven't raised hell either over moratorium. There is a culture already in Guyana that they are troubled about the cruelty and the finality of the death penalty. So the moratorium is good, and implicit in having a moratorium that long is that pretty soon we hope it will be legalized and then lead to abolition.
Of course, it's on the people of Guyana to choose what they want to do with the death penalty. We are just here to share some international experiences. But what I would like to point out, how I would see a logical sequencing. Both previous government and current government intend to establish or have established a committee which would be discussing the issue of retaining or abolishing the death penalty. So if this body is established, and I think it would be very good to be established, then that would be an opportunity for wide discussion of costs and benefits of death penalty. But also during that time, wouldn't it be logical that there is a decision by, for example, Parliament, that there is a moratorium on execution while we are discussing whether we shall execute or not? And then the decision will be made.
And of course, it's got to be buttressed by a constitutional amendment as well. Now, my final question, the operator steering me down, how important it is to get America and China to come on board, because they're two the most serious violators of this whole issue. How important is it?
I think it's very important, but let's first take the United States. There, it's not that in every state you have capital punishment.
Correct.
In quite a high number already of states it is. We chose that it is possible. We chose also that those are not the states where you have higher crime because the death penalty has been abolished. It's rather quite a country. It's in the states where there is a death penalty where you have a high crime rate. So if there is a relation, it's rather the other way around. And China, well, we can also hope maybe it will take some time before China will respect all civil and political rights the way we think they should. But at least on this issue, they should be able to do an important step, and we hope that this will not last too long.
America, United States are already moving rapidly away from the death penalty. The number of states that abolish death penalty is rapidly growing, and number of executed persons is rapidly decreasing. I think last year it was not more than some 35 people, which is incomparable with previous executions in the United States. With China, there was a major political decision of Politburo to move away from the death penalty. But it's a big ship and it slowly turns. But already they have reduced a number of criminal offenses that can be punished by death penalty, which is a first step in that direction.
Commissioner Pillay, you have the last word.
Oh, good, yeah, I like that. Well, if the United States and China claim to hold moral leadership in the world, and both countries do, They have to understand that they must come out of the cold, join the rest of the international community. 160 states have either abolished or agreed to a moratorium. So come out from those backwaters and join the international community and move forward, and above all, to observe the rule of law. They're not beyond it just because they're superpowers.
Be on good side of the history.
Yeah.
Commissioner Pillay, Dr. Yvonne Simonovic, Professor Marc Bossuyt, thank you so very much for sharing your very limited time with us on Plain Talk this evening. I've enjoyed this program. I keep repeating that I am a pro-abolitionist, even though some of my questions may not point in that direction. I'd also like to thank the European Union for making it possible, and the United Nations office in Vienna for making it possible for you people to appear and share with us. And we wish you well, we wish our country well. It would be good if indeed the next time we have a colloquium we can say, yes, we've signed on. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Operators and viewers, thank you. Good night. See you next week. Have a great week.